Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Who's that yonder dressed in red? Wade in the water. Must be the children that Moses led. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Who's that yonder dressed in white? Wade in the water. Must be the children of the Israelite. Oh, God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water.
Well, if you made it here to second episode, means I piqued your interest enough to at least give me another chance. So I want to start off with a few observations that I've discovered just recently, and it kind of bolsters my wow theory. Remember, my wow theory states that God has created all things to be awesome in such a way and to such a degree that it prompts a wow and begs new questions and new discoveries. Well, I've always been interested in the Hadron Collider, the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. You've probably heard about it. It does just what it sounds like. It collides particles. And they've been down for the last couple of years prior to 2021, upgrading and repairing some stuff. It has super conducting magnets in it that are so powerful that when they first turned it on decades ago, it kind of tore itself apart. But anyways, in July 5th, 2022, they were colliding particles and they found 3 new particles. They call them petroquarks and tetraquarks. And since then, they found 70 new hadrons. Now, hadron is a subatomic particle that contains 2 or more quarks. And I've said that because when I was in high school, our science books were kind of old. They were outdated. But even then, I remember reading that actually this was back in middle school, that the atom was the smallest particle. Okay, atom's the smallest particle. So what? You know, and molecules are made of atoms. Then they found out that atoms had subatomic particles. And they named them electrons, neutrons, and protons. Neutrons being neutrally charged, electrons being negatively charged, and protons being positively charged. And the positively charged protons were attracted to the neutrons, and that's what kept them together. And there's all these different atoms that make up all the different elements that we have. And for the longest time, science said, okay, that's small as it goes. It goes subatomic. Then they found out that those particles were made out of particles. Then we find out that those particles are made out of smaller particles, and on it goes. So the latest thing is that CERN is not only looking for smaller and smaller particles, but they're now looking for what they're calling a fifth force of nature. And if you know what the four forces are, you've learned that in school. It's gravity, electromagnetism, the nuclear strong force, and the nuclear weak force. But they believe there's another fifth force. They don't know what it is, but it seems like it's out there. That's my wow theory. And CERN has several new questions that they didn't have before. See, it begs these new questions, and I wrote them down. It's one of the questions that they're trying to figure out is, what is the nature of the Higgs boson? You know, Higgs is the field that is everywhere, and a boson is a particle that when it passes through that field, it gives all the other particles mass. And I remember when they found that a few years ago, that was like the biggest deal. Like, finally we found, they called it the God particle. Finally we found that. And all that did was beg more questions. They have another question. They said, are there new particles beyond the standard model? Which probably. What is the nature of dark matter? Can we uncover the mysteries of antimatter? And what is the quark-gluon plasma? So that's a lot of questions, and you know, I believe, my wow theory, when they find the answers to those questions, it's going to beg a bunch of more questions. It will never end. So my wow theory is intact and just getting more and more interesting. So that brings me to a biblical lesson. Some of you guys are going to want to tune me out right now, but hear me out. I'm going to show you something very, very interesting. Even to the people that think they know what they know. You don't know. But first I have to give you a grammar lesson. And that's boring. It's a short lesson, but something if you learn it, you won't forget it, and it will serve you well. And it's about clauses. I'll put that on the screen here. But a clause structure is a group of related words containing a subject and a verb, and it may or may not express a complete thought. Okay? Now, call that an independent clause or a dependent clause. And it depends on whether that clause expresses a complete thought or not. Now, stay with me here. So a dependent clause does not express a complete thought. Example, John is in his room studying. Okay, that's a complete thought. I don't need to add anything to it. And you get the idea that John's in his room studying. But what if I add one word to that? The word when. If I say, when John is in his room studying, you want to say, what? When he's in his room studying, what? See, that's a dependent clause. It needs more, not independent. So if I say, John is in his room, when John is in his room studying, he likes to keep the door closed. Oh, now it's a complete thought. It's a complete clause. See how easy that was? Now you know the difference between an independent and a dependent clause. I could also give you that exact same idea if I say, John likes to keep the door closed when he's in his room studying. Probably to keep Eli out. But you get the idea, okay? Now, that's in your head. We're going to talk about some Hebrew. Hebrew grammar is very, very much like English grammar, and especially when it comes to clause. It's the same thing. So let's start in the beginning. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The second verse says, Now the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And then the third verse says, And God said, Let there be light, and there was light. Okay, if you've ever read the Bible or heard anything about Genesis, you've heard those verses. And I'm here to show you something interesting. All right? And hopefully I can put this up on the screen behind me. The Jewish Publication Society is pretty savvy on the Hebrew manuscripts. And reading right to left, and I'll put that up on my, it's called Hebrew Interlinear. You'll see how the first letter will have underneath it, because they don't, in the manuscripts they don't have the definite article, but you'll have these little icons underneath to help you interpret how it's the context. So there'll be either a little, looks like a little T with a dot under it, or there'll be two little dots under it. And in every single case, it's the two little dots. And what does that mean? It means when. There's no debating what it means. It means when. So now let's read that again. So it should say, when in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now it's not an independent clause. It's like, what? Yeah, what? When in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Now it has a different feeling to it. I could also legitimately translate it, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, when God began creating the heavens and the earth. That's a total legitimate Hebrew to English interpretation, translation. So let's think about that for a minute. Okay, in the first instance, you have, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and that makes you think, okay, the first thing he did was make the earth, but he made it in such a way that it was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So verse 1, verse 2, and then verse 3 was, and he said, let there be light. Boom, there's light. He got down to business. But if you read it this way, you put the when in there, which really you should do. You can say the earth was formless and void when God began creating the heavens and the earth. So you get the idea that the heavens and the earth existed, but they were formless and void. And so his first creative act was say, let there be light, and he got started. Now, why is that significant? Because we have this science that's telling us that the earth is 3.75 billion years old. But when you go to the Bible and you start off 6 days of creation, and you got Adam, and then you start following the chronology, you've only got a 6,000-year-old earth. How is that possible? There's two possibilities in my mind. One is that this isn't talking about the first beginning when he created the universe, which he did. This is talking about a beginning when he finally decided to, okay, things have been swirling around for billions of years. I'm going to start making stuff now. And I'll get into that in the Gerald Schroeder's The Science of God. That gets pretty complicated. But for right now, the point I wanted to get across is, and this would be for another video also, is that the Bible is not a science book. Believe it or not, I'm going to prove to you that the Bible is a book of theological messaging. And I'll have to explain that term better in episode 3. But you're going to find out that the Bible was never meant to be a science book. So to try to make it fit into science is just dishonest, because it was never meant to be that. I'm not saying that it's scientifically opposed to our science. I'm just saying that it doesn't work that way. It's in the mind of a first temple Jewish person. They didn't know that much about science. They didn't need to know about science. But they did need to know which God created them and their world, because in those days there were hundreds of pagan gods that claimed that they were creators of the universe. Which God do I worship? And that's what you're going to find out. The Bible is actually addressing that, and it gets more interesting the deeper you go. So that should give you something to think about. And if I piqued your interest again, maybe you'll watch episode 3. So I love you guys, and stay tuned.